Okay, thanks very much for having us here today in this joint celebration of SIGA and JPAL. I think the motto is, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like evidence into action. I think one thing that I want to make sure that comes across in all these presentations is that I think they've been designed so that you're seeing the projects as they begin in their very early stages and then kind of evolve into action. And I think it's probably worth noting that at some point, about 3 years ago, I had a kind of radicalizing experience. And I went to Washington and worked for a year. And I think before I'd gone to Washington, I thought, oh, well, I'm going to write my little papers. And then in table 8 of the paper, there's the policy implications there in column 3, panel B. And I thought for sure Nancy Pelosi, John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, Harry Reid would sit around late at night and debate, what did I really mean in panel B, column 3? And I think all too often academics do not see that that is not actually what Nancy Pelosi or John Boehner is doing. And I think that's why this kind of joint collaboration between SIGA and JPAL is so important, because I would say of equal importance is both the high quality research and also the outreach and turning into action. And so that's why it's so excellent to be able to talk about this collaboration with initially my colleague and now my friend Hardik Shah, who's the member secretary of the Gujarat Pollution Control Board. So what does that mean in U.S. terms? Effectively, he's the head of the EPA of a state, like California State EPA, and is in charge of making sure that the rules are followed. So with that background, let me just talk a little bit. So I think I'm going to get through 46 slides in the next 17 minutes, so we'll go a little more quickly. So I think it's just worth saying, so why is, there's at least 3 broad motivations for this project. The first is that less pollution means longer and healthier lives. And so one thing I think that is not always appreciated is the role that policy can play in pollution. So in a paper I'm not going to talk about today, with some colleagues, we were able to show that a policy that China implemented with, I think, absolutely the best of intentions, reduced the life expectancies of people who lived in a particular region of China by 5 years. And that's because it was effectively a coal-burning policy. The second broad motivation is, regulation is all too frequently ineffective both in developed and in developing countries. Done some work on India, which has somewhat of a mixed record with respect to air and water pollution. I think the third broad motivation is the pink elephant in the room. And let me just say, thank God I didn't have to go after Tom Steyer. Catherine, you did a very good job. And I think it's hard to talk about environment and without thinking about climate change. And there's many ways that one can illustrate that. The projected mortality costs of climate change in India are expected to be extraordinarily high. It's also worth noting that developing countries are going to be responsible for most of the projected increase in greenhouse gas emissions for some of the reasons we've been talking about today. And it's probably also safe to say that the international climate negotiations have not proven to be some grand success, where there's going to be a global cap and trade market with all countries participating. And in practice, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to have individual countries doing individual things. And so that's a context for trying to figure out how to get effective environmental regulation in Gujarat. And so just as background, Gujarat's a highly industrialized state, has about 20% of all manufacturing activity. It also has high levels of air and water pollution. And here's a picture from, I think, Surat, one of the regions that we worked in. It's also, another thing that's worth noting as background is that India has really an incredibly advanced set of rules and regulations that fall out of their Clean Water Act of 1974 and their Clean Air Act of 1981. And those rules are kind of set at the federal level, and then they're delegated to the states like Gujarat for enforcement. The Gujarat Pollution Control Board, Hardik will be able to talk more authoritatively about this, but regulates about 20,000 plants through command and control regulation. The regulator is very powerful, has the ability to turn off the electricity, effectively shut down plants that are not complying one way or another. And there are two main tools, now coming to the project that I'm going to talk about, there are two main tools available for figuring out which plants are polluting too much, exceeding the standard, and which plants are meeting the standard that's been set for them. And the first is the Gujarat Pollution Control Board has their own set of inspectors, and they go around and take readings. And then the second are third-party audits. And now third-party audits are ubiquitous around the world. We use them all the time. We use them in financial markets in the United States, and we use them in many, many other settings. And in this case, like all other cases that I'm aware of, the third-party audits have a fundamental flaw. And this is not unique to Gujarat. This is, I think, in every other setting where we use third-party markets, certainly including third-party auditing of financial records of firms in the United States. And that is that the guy who's getting regulated is the guy who pays the auditor. And so, like, you could not teach that in a class at the University of California, Berkeley as a sensible approach to regulation. It doesn't pass the sniff test. And so, you know, I think Tom Sarah was making fun of antiseptic language. This was meant to be antiseptic language. The auditor's interests may not be perfectly aligned to report the truth because they're being hired by the guy who doesn't want to get in trouble with Hardik Shah. Now, I should say the guys who run in Gujarat, not stupid people, they're well aware, and they did like all the usual things that people do when they have these markets. The auditors can't also do consulting for the company. There's rotation mandated every 3 years. And the audit team, there's several other ones, including the audit teams have to be filled by people who actually have the skills to do take the pollution readings. Okay, so in this context, what is an audit? An audit, this team of auditors, you're effectively contracting with a team of auditors to come to your plant 3 times during the year, and at the end they're going to submit, they will take readings, and at the end they're going to submit the readings on, you know, you had this and this concentration of sulfur dioxide, this of particulate matter, and these were your levels of water pollution. Now, the consequences, if you, for not participating in that system accurately, is that non-submission or non-compliance is punishable in principle by closure, again through disconnection of water and electricity, and false reports can lead to the auditor being decertified. So when we began this project several years ago, we first, of course, just did some kind of qualitative snooping around to figure out what was going on. And the first sign that there might be trouble was that as far as we could estimate using numbers that we got from the Gujarat Pollution Control Board, it costs about 40,000 rupees to do these 3 audits and send them the report at the end of the year, just with the lab reports and sending the teams out and the whole thing. Now, it turned out when we surveyed the plants, they said that they were only paying 24,000. So right away, you have to think maybe all the tests weren't being taken, and that was a suggestion that there was a problem. And indeed, the regulator was suspicious of the quality of the audits, and in fact, in kind of an ironic twist, the regulated plants themselves were suing to get the audit system removed because they said it wasn't useful. All right, so what did we do? We took a bunch of plants, about 500 plants in Gujarat, that in 2 the most populous cities. They were eligible for these audits. We randomly assigned them into a treatment group and then a control group who just kind of did the status quo. And we offered all certified certified auditors to be able to participate in our treatment, and I will explain the treatment here. And the treatment really just has 4 parts, which are meant to break this kind of doesn't pass the smell test feature of all audit markets. The first is that there's random assignment of the auditors of the firms. You can't hire your brother anymore. The second is rather than entering some negotiation with the regulated plant or some agreement, each plant, the payment is fixed and it's paid from a central pool, not by the plant. Then we also had a system of back checks where we had our own teams that went around behind the auditors, took the exact same readings, and then the auditors knew that, and in principle, we were going to compare it. And in fact, in the second year of the program, we gave a bonus if our readings were similar to their readings. So they knew that they were being watched. All right, so there's three main sources. You know, we have these auditor reports of what they sent to the regulator, of what the pollution levels were. We have our back checks, and then 6 months after we ran this this experiment, we then went and surveyed all the plants and took our own pollution readings. And so why did we do that? Well, after all, it is very interesting to try to be able to figure out if you can get the auditors to tell the truth, and that was certainly one of the main goals. But you know, honestly, the ultimate goal was to provide a more effective form of regulation. And so we went and checked the pollution readings to see if the altered audit reports, and what I will show you is that they became more truthful, caused the plants to get in line a little bit more. Okay, and so here's just some of the pollutants. I don't think we have time to go through it, but we have 6 water pollutants and 3 air pollutants that we took measurements for. This seems kind of necessary in all development economics presentations. You have to have pictures, and so here's a guy. He's going to drop that bucket down into that outlet where the water's going. He's going to get a sample. He's going to put it into the white thing, and they're going to send that to the lab and figure out the pollution concentrations. And here they're taking a stack sample of air pollution. Okay, so number one. So you guys have to really be ready for this. This is like, and I want you to focus on what's coming. The reporting was corrupt under the status quo. Now, okay, so now we're going to do this with pictures. So here we've got the distribution of reports. Let's just go very slowly here. This is in the control group. This is a status quo set of people. The red line is the standard. Every plant, according to the law, has to be to the left of the red line, which, and this is, we just pulled this out for one pollutant. This is for particulate matter, which has some of the worst health consequences. Okay, now it turned out 94% of the plants were meeting the standard according to this. And not just at 94% were, 73% were within 25% of the standard, so just below it. So if you're looking for a way to not be conspicuous, that's probably a good place to be. You don't want it to be too low. And it turned out almost all of the data was there. Okay, so now, deep breath. What I'm going to show is we're going to go to those exact same plants, and we're going to do our back checks. And so remember, the back checks are the truth. Thanks to Hardik, we were able to go in there. They couldn't stop us, take the readings, and in principle, if they were telling the truth, this distribution better look exactly like the distribution that's coming up. But I think you know what's going to happen here. They look very different. And so it turns out, so I wrote this down because I always get it wrong, but instead of 93% compliance, there's 41% compliance. You also see a bunch of guys, it's kind of weird, really, really low levels of pollution. And why might you see that? I think our theory is that they just weren't taking the readings. And it was, and again, if you didn't want to look conspicuous, what you do is you put the guys in that little gray area. And there's this big tail of guys who are really just cranking out the pollution and way over the standard. Okay, so that's number one. So now what we're going to do is test whether or not we have changed the world, we have changed their incentives, whether or not this causes the auditors to begin to report to the Gujarat Pollution Control Board something that is closer to the truth. And so I'm going to put up those same 2 graphs again. Top one will be what the auditor is reporting. Bottom one are going to be the back checks. And the question is, do they look more alike? And so this is not like totally bang on the same 2 distributions of pollution, but the difference with what you just saw is remarkable. And so let me try to summarize that. So there's an 81% reduction in auditors that were falsely reporting compliance. Remember, we know false reporting compliance because we know the truth and we know what the auditor said. And there was a 69%. I have 20 minutes more? No. And there was a 69% reduction in the reports in that narrow range in the gray area. Okay. So, like operation success. So now the plants know that this great information that's closely approximating the truth is flowing to Hardik. So what the heck are they going to do? It's a mystery. The plot thickens. We're going to skip it because we don't have time. All right. and the treatment caused the plants to reduce their pollution. And so 6 months after the treatment ended, we went and took readings at all these plants. So this is in weird units, but you should think of this as average across all pollutants, the treatment plants reduced their pollution emissions by 0.2 standard deviation. So what is that in English? It turns out standard deviation is so big for a lot of these pollutants because you saw the wide distribution. That's like almost as much as the standard itself for most pollutants. So these were really important reductions. It's also worth noting that the plants who chose to reduce, doesn't look like it's in English, but I'll just give you the punchline, they're all really the biggest polluters. And those are the ones who I think GPCB and Hardik can talk to this, are the ones who I think they're better able to focus their attention on. So that made sense. Okay, and so now research into action, I promised you that. And so what we did is, based on that, we presented to the Gujarat Pollution Control Board with 3 recommendations: randomly assign auditors plants, no negotiation between auditors and plants under fees, and then monitor the auditors, reporting through back checks. And Hardik is going to talk a little bit about what has come with that proposal. And let me just say, what I think is maybe, for me, more exciting than even just what we found is, like, we now have this unbelievable collaboration. And this is like sprouting. And so we're now working with the government of India, and in particular with Gujarat, to set up, now we can't say this anymore in the US, but a cap and trade program in India for particulates. So we really have an opportunity to be an incredible, I think it's an incredible opportunity. So let me turn it over to my friend Hardik.
Thanks, Michael. In fact, I'll just try to take you in a very brief way why this research was so important to us and how we converted research into the policy and policy to the practice. So before I go to those things, let me just give you an overview about Gujarat. Gujarat is on the western part of India, and one of the fastest growing states in India. It has 5% of Indian population, but contributes to about 22% of the export. When we talk of the pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and petrochemicals, Gujarat contributes to about 35%, 51%, and 62% respectively in the Indian overall production systems, and is one of the people say that in India, if India has to grow say by 7%, Gujarat has to ensure growth of 12%. So that's the Gujarat's contribution into the Indian economy, and that's why it's very important for us. But at the same time, while we say that pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and petrochemicals, we have very strong foundation of these 3 manufacturing sector, and that's the challenge that we have to manage the pollution from these sectors, because over a period of time, all these industries have come to India and in Gujarat, which were to some extent discarded by the Western world. So that is the biggest challenge that we have. And to cope up these challenges, what is the monitoring mechanism? What is the enforcement mechanism that we have in the pollution control board side? So we have basically 2 fold strategies to monitor and inspect the industries. One is our own regulatory mechanism, that is through our own officers and staff. We do monitor the industries, but here we have a lot of constraints because of the number of industries are increasing and the staff is very limited, the capacity of the staff, and all these things were a big challenge rather at this point of time. So at that time, we have another monitoring mechanism in place, which is a court mandated. At one point of time, we had a lot of pollution related issues. Judiciary became very active and introduced this environmental audit scheme, which is very peculiar to Gujarat, whereby the third party auditors, the private or environmental firms are mandated to conduct the environmental audit for various industrial firms and produce their reports. So this is additional strategy that we had. So we conducted this research and to adopt some innovative ideas, because here we were knowing that to some extent that there are pollution, there are some problems, because when the court mandated this environmental audit and asked the third party to inspect the firms and generate the reports which could be used by the regulators for their regulatory purpose, but it wasn't working satisfactorily, and it wasn't working to the expectations that we had. And over a period of a decade, there were 3 attempts made in the Gujarat High Court to scrap this scheme, because the industries were fully convinced that this is an additional burden to them. It is not helping the regulator even the way it was expected by the Honorable High Court of Gujarat. So at that point of time, the country's premier most research institute in India that we have, NEERI, National Environmental Engineering and Research Institute, which was roped into this particular aspect, whether we really need to have this scheme, or do we get rid of this scheme at all. So NEERI said that yes, it did a very detailed research and came out with the findings that this is a wonderful scheme. It has to help the regulators. Rather, it should be emulated by all the states. But it also identified certain flaws in the system and said that yes, it requires a strengthening. So how to strengthen and what are the flaws? We did not have those clear evidences by that time. That's the reason that this particular research, which is very important to us, why did we partner the research institute like JPAL, say MIT and Harvard? Because we have a very strong state commitment for environmental protection. Unlike many other developing countries, we have, because the chief minister of the state, he is the person who is known as Green Crusader for Gujarat and India. He is the person who has written the book on convenient action, which is Gujarat's response to the climate change, and also gave a lot of vision for environmental protection. But at the same time, we knew that the scheme which we had in place wasn't working satisfactorily. But while we approached the High Court, while we approached the industries, while we approached the auditors, we did not have enough evidences to tell them that you are not doing properly. You are not doing your job to the satisfaction, and that's why we conducted this research, and we said that let's join the hands, let's sign a formal agreement, and then we started working together. Like rather the back checks which was carried out all throughout this scheme, which was done jointly by the team of JPAL and the GPCB. And the entire scheme was monitored and regulated for, rather implemented for a couple of years, and came out with a very strong 3 recommendations. The recommendations were one, let the industries be assigned to the auditors instead of industries choosing the auditors. Okay, so let the firms be randomly assigned to the auditors. So that's one. Secondly, let there be no negotiation of the fees, because as Michael mentioned, there were a lot of hanky-pankies happening, and the auditing firms were paid so less that they want. We can't expect them to do their job that satisfactorily. So under the scheme, we paid from the central pool fund, and the recommendation is now either to pay the auditors from the central pool, or to have a fixed fees based on the volume of the work, the number of samples they need to analyze, the number of parameters they need to carry out. And third is to introduce a system of random back check. In fact, I'm reminded when we had this scheme introduced in mid-90s by the High Court of Gujarat, there was an element of back check which wasn't pursued at a later stage, and we rather modified this scheme at that point of time. So how the evidences, like once we had these evidences in place, which were very clear, we took up these things in form of a conference with the auditors, auditing firms, and showed them, this is what you have been doing, and this what is the result that we have got. And they got convinced that yes, because the industries select them, and they have to some extent be loyal to the person who is hiring them. Secondly, the payment of the fees wasn't really very satisfactorily, so that they could really do their job thoroughly and properly. And they also agreed, yes, better we have a revised or the modified system in place, whereby the industries would be assigned to the auditors by the regulator, and the fees would be either through the central pool or a fixed fees. So there was a very clear, encouraging response. Rather, they were so happy to have this scheme introduced. So then, how to take it was a big challenge. It wasn't that easy. Now, those who are aware about the developing countries and the systems that we have, it wasn't easy to convert this research into the policy. right? Because there are a lot of issues in converting the policies, converting the researches into the policies, and that's why we have a lot of researches done, but they remain, most of them remain on the cells of the universities. So here we had two challenges. One, to get the approval from the Pollution Control Board, the board of directors. They come from diversified sectors, from finance, from industries, from municipalities, urban sectors, so on. And to convince them, yes, we really need to have this scheme modified and have a revised policy in place. Second, probably we need to go to the High Court again, saying that the scheme which you introduced, we might need some kind of a modification, kindly allow us to do that. So these were two basic challenges that we had. And while we took up with the board, well, it was very different experience altogether, because the results were so clear, transparent, and convincing that it did not take us much of the pain to convince the board. And board approved all the 3 recommendations. So that's very unusual most of the time that we see in this kind of research. But yeah, we could get the board approval for all the 3 recommendations to be incorporated in our revised policy, which we have in place now. And in fact, there was, I remember there was one board member from the finance department. So informally, he said that, in fact, we can adopt this particular, recommendation for assigning the firms to different, financing auditing things also. So like, it's something like horizontal, transfer of the evidences. So that is also being talked of. And finally, how the policies we are taking forward to the practice. Now that we have the board approval in place, so the software that we work on, it's one of the, I would say one of the most robust software that we have introduced in Gujarat for all the transactions that we have, all the interactions that we have between the regulator and the industries. And that software, we have named it as Extended Green Node. We call it at XGN. Now that the auditors are required to feed their auditing schedule into the software, and the software randomly generates what percentage or what auditors are required to be back checked, and the software would assign to the regulators, to different other auditors for the back check work. So that modification has already been done, and now that once we have the High Court, Gujarat High Court's consent available, we will have the revised module inserted into the software that we have already been using in XGN. So that would be now that we have the software which will decide which industrial firm is to be audited by which auditor. So there won't be any human intervention, and the entire system would be governed without intervention of man or the officer. So the system will take care of it, and the system will also ensure that the same auditor will not be assigned the same industry for next 2 years at least, so that we have different auditors generating different monitoring reports for different industries. And once we have the High Court approval, probably the revised fees, which we have decided to work for a fixed fees based on the volume of the work to be carried out by the auditors, instead of allowing the auditor and firm to negotiate about the fees. So with this background, let me just conclude that we had a very nice journey all throughout working with Michael and his entire team. And that's the reason that we are now working very closely on the new project. That's the installation of SAMS, that's the continuous emission monitoring systems in Gujarat, and also developing emission trading system, which is very innovative concept for India kind of regulatory regime, where we have most of the time command and control policies in place, and it's totally out of the box thinking if we talk of pollution trading. And it's again great privilege to say that the new program which we are working on right now is designing a market-based model for water pollutants also. So hopefully the things move in a nice way, and probably we'll be able to have more such interactions. So this is, some sort of an example that, the researches have got converted into the policies into the practice, and few more researches in place, so that we have few more evidences, few more policies. So this is the way we can, have the bondings between the academia, the researchers, and the policy planners, strengthened further, especially in the developing kind of an economy where this is very, very important. Environment is very, very important element of the entire gamut of economic development. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. How did the changes to the program affect the cost and profitability of auditing? And does this program presume strong enforcement of violations when you've identified them through the auditing process? And can you tell us more about enforcement of violations?
So as far as we can tell, and this is, the auditors aren't opening their books to us, it's possible that their profits might actually decline a little bit. And the reason is, although we paid a pretty high fee, they now have to do all this extra work. And so we designed it so that it would be enough so that they could adequately do all the testing that they were supposed to do. And then whether or not, how that affected profits was somewhere in the gray area there. But we aimed for it to be high enough that they could do all their work. And I think the fees that they're going to set in the future are going to have that same feature. And then you also asked about enforcement. There's no question the whole thing doesn't work. The only purpose of this is to provide a channel of reliable information to the Gujarat Pollution Control Board. And if they don't use that information to enforce penalties or things like that, then obviously it should have no effect on pollution. So,
Yeah, in fact, as a regulator, we do have a very strong tool to, punish the industries, including, switching off their electricity supply. But yeah, the major question is, do we have adequate information to, take action and punish the industries? And now that, with this much of reliability in the modified scheme, we will have better information, which we will be generating and using through a system and a software. So, yeah, we hope it's going to be, very much helpful in the regulatory work itself.
All right, we actually have time for just one more question in the back.
Have you shared this experience with Chinese regulators?
I think Hardik is the best person to answer that question.
Not with the Chinese regulator, but we did share this experience with other states in India. So we have, like Gujarat, we have 35 state pollution control boards. And in one of the conferences of member secretaries and chairman of pollution control boards, I made a presentation and it was well received. Many other states have shown a lot of interest of adopting the revised and modified scheme in their states as well.
Yeah, isn't it? Wasn't there some talk about possibly using this in other contexts as well, not just for pollution?
You mean finance?
Yeah,
those
yeah.
things? Yeah. Well, the evidence is, the way we could generate, like when the auditors are not selected by the person who is having interest in the audit, and if it is mandated to a regulatory, information generation, it can better be used by many other departments. So, like in Gujarat itself, the then finance secretary, he was very much keen to emulate this particular recommendation in assigning the auditing firms to various government departments and even the private organizations for financing, auditing their accounts and finances. So maybe we will have a larger penetration.
And I think, let me just add one thing, just from a purely research perspective. Obviously, experiment was done in a very specific context, pollution in Gujarat, India. But, I don't want to push it too far, but we do think that there are probably some general lessons. And, specifically, these third-party audit markets are used all over the world for all kinds of things. Carbon credits is one example. The quarterly reports of publicly traded companies in the United States is another. And as far as we can tell, every single one of them has this feature, this really weird feature that no one could teach at the University of California at Berkeley, which is that the guy who needs a favorable report is the one who's paying for it. And so we think that, this basic finding might be applicable in other settings.